There he is.
Hello, how's it going?
Oh, I'm fine. Are you home safe in the London area?
Yeah, I've been in London for a few weeks now. I had a bout of illness for 2 weeks that kind of took me out of action, and I
Not
slept.
related?
Yeah, COVID. Yeah, I s- well, I gave it to a friend who's a medic, and they got tested, and it was like positive. So yeah,
But
so
you're
I
you're
could
you're
fairly.
feeling better.
Oh yeah, I'm fine now. But the worrying thing was for about 5 or 6 days afterwards. So like, it was 2 weeks. Took me out. I was sleeping lots and just like taking it easy.
So,
And then
fever, high fever, yeah.
lots of fevers, like fever, shivery, and fatigue was the worst thing. So I was just like going to bed and just like lying. So I'd get up in the morning, then I'd go to bed for a couple of hours, get up, and then go to bed early, not eat or drink much. And the worst thing was afterwards, wine tasted weird. It's like I'd open a few bottles and it's like taste them. It's like they all taste disgusting and rubbish.
What
I could
about
still taste,
food?
but they had a taint. It was like it's weird.
Okay. But did food taste good?
Food tasted okay, not great, but it was. I think it's because when you attune your palate to one thing, like wine, when you're like super analytical, then you really notice if there's a difference. And I did, and so I just couldn't drink wine, couldn't rate wine, and I was thinking about alternative careers, which it's tough.
And how long? So now,
Now,
you got now palate back?
perfect, yeah, it's fine. Such a relief. It came back over like 2 days, and it's like I was thinking, yeah, I'm getting close to wine. There's a slight residual taint. It was making all the wines taste like slightly stewed and oxidized, like stewed and oxidized and rubbish. And so when you're tasting wine and you know what a wine is supposed to taste like, and you've got this, it's like these wines couldn't all have been bad, but they were all tasting bad. So it's almost like
Right.
to the point where I was thinking of like, yeah, this is like, if this goes, if my ability to taste wine, which, is something I do quite a lot of, professionally,
Yeah.
then it really reduces the sphere in which I can operate. And so, yeah, so it's scary, but that's life. We have to adapt to change all the time. And maybe at some stage I'll have to get a new career. Who knows?
Well, I mean, wow. That's obviously I'm glad that you're better, and
Yeah.
that's incredible. That
So you've
just
you've
that
made a
little bit of
transition
story.
recently, yeah? Yeah, because obviously that's for the last couple of years that I've known you, you've been working
Yeah.
with New York State and the wines and
Yes.
um
Very having nothing to do with COVID. Put notice in earlier in the year. Just moving on to do my own thing to explore, consider other opportunities.
yeah.
I always said I was only going to do maybe two or three phases,
Mhm.
and I just kind of when looking back at my
Yeah.
track record at restaurants, I always felt like I made the decision to leave at the right time for me.
Yeah.
Um, so it
So you've
just
made quite a few transitions then. Did you start out in restaurants? Was that your first thing?
was not my first thing. My first thing was music.
Mhm.
I weirdly, I never waited tables, never worked in a restaurant in my life. Went through music school mostly for jazz, a little bit of classical guitar, and then worked as a jazz guitarist. Got incredibly lucky very early on and hooked up with a band, and we were signed to a record label before the like bottom of the music business fell out for a time there. But right before streaming like really took over, this is back like '05, '06. So they were still kind of handing out traditional record deals back then.
Yeah.
So we got lucky. So I did that for about 10 years in total, playing guitar professionally, and got so tired of like that life, traveling and in that style. Every job you travel for is different. Um, but just that, I just no longer enjoyed being a professional musician. And I loved wine, reading the books about wine. Anytime I had a gig on the West Coast, I'm renting a car and driving to, all the wine regions or in Europe. Um, and so, yeah, I just kind of quit the band and literally responded to an ad on the internet to get a job at an urban winery in Brooklyn. at Brooklyn Winery, and that was back in 2010, and I just kept going ever since. And then, yeah, then from there it was kind of sort of the traditional, semi-traditional sommelier path through New York City.
Yeah.
But
So,
but
what have you got in
Canada,
your glass?
what do I have in my glass? Okay, well, you go first because
Okay.
I think you're going to have the more, at least a wine that I probably certainly can't get around here.
Well, I'll show you the label. I've gone to Niagara, so we're discussing lake wines, yeah? And so,
Yes, I did open a lake wine.
yeah, so I've opened a lake wine, but this is from the Niagara Peninsula, and it's Tours. You'll see the label back to front, I think, and you see it there. But it's a Tours Chardonnay, and it's the Quarry Road Vineyard, and it's Vinemount Ridge VQA from Niagara Peninsula. And two things to note about this wine. First of all, it's biodynamically farmed grapes, which in the Niagara Peninsula is kind of challenging. Second thing, it's a 2011 vintage. So this is just over 8 years old. And it's a Chardonnay, which is one of the signature varieties of Niagara. I guess the two white signature varieties would be Riesling and Chardonnay. And yeah, so it's, I tried it earlier. I had a little sneaky preview. And it's astonishingly focused and fresh still.
So that's the famous one. That's like their famous single vineyard.
Yeah. The Tours is
Big
Tours is one of the top producers. I mean, if I was going to list the top producer in Niagara, this is actually it's challenging to do it off the top of your head because you might forget people. But Tours, I think, are right up there. They've got a really nice range and they cover the bases. So in Niagara, we're talking about a Riesling, Chardonnay, Cabernet Franc, Gamay, which is a strong performer there, and Pinot Noir, and they do all of those.
And then a few oddballs for blending and for
yes.
fun.
I mean, there's other stuff. I mean, there's some really nice Syrahs, for instance, from some of the warmer spots in Niagara. But, you know, people get hit every 10 years by the really cold winters. And so Syrah is quite sensitive to very cold winters. And one of the things about, as you know, from these regions, and as the Finger Lakes has the same sort of thing. When you plant anything a little bit too exotic that's not very cold hardy, occasionally you will end up replanting that vineyard because the winter temperatures dip to the point that basically the vines don't survive. So other stars in Niagara would include Batchelder. Thomas Batchelder's makes fantastic wines in Niagara. There's loads. I mean, I don't want to start going too far because I'll end up missing people out. But there's Niagara's I first went there in 2013. I've been back pretty much every year since. There's a lot of people making really good wine now. It's a region.
So how did you? Yeah, it's interesting because you do spend a good amount of time in Canada.
Yeah.
I mean, for any writer, how did you keep going back with such regularity?
A number of reasons. First of all, is I went there in 2013, and I've made a few friends in the region, but also I've met with the folks who organise the National Wine Awards of Canada. And I persuaded them that they needed an overseas judge, and I pointed out that I was actually from overseas. And so the next year, 2014, I judged the National Wine Awards in Penticton in the Okanagan, because it kind of switches from different sides of the country each year. And I met all the guys who judged there, and it's a really tight group, and we had a fantastic time. And so I've done 6 NWACs in a row now. So judging wine there has kept me there every year. Also, when somebody from outside who has an international perspective shows an interest in emerging wine regions and covers them, then you get invited back because you're providing something that the local writers can't, which is international perspective. And
so have you found anywhere outside of Canada that reliably sells Ontario wines?
It's starting. In the UK, we've had a couple of events as well before the coronavirus. There were a couple of events in the UK and there was one planned for May. So consistently, the Canadians have been knocking on the door of the UK market. And I think when you do that, when you've got something that's different and original, markets like the UK are willing to respond. It's just you've got to be patient. You've got to keep knocking the door. And I think what the Canadians have done very cleverly is they've kept knocking. They've been patient, and as a result, then we're seeing now more and more Canadian wines getting a listing in the UK.
So what can you go out?
Tours have got a Chardonnay in Odd Bins, which is a national sort of chain of off licenses, and their restaurants. There's a really reasonable core of retailers and restaurants now that are starting to stock Canadian wines. It's still early days.
So you'll like this because you like the history too. So when I first got to New York in 2008, I moved out from Michigan, and my family had a small cottage on the Canadian side of Lake Huron. So when I'm like in my early 20s, first drinking wine really, I'm regularly grabbing Henry of Pelham Baca Noir off the shelf at the LCBO, and I had no idea what the grape was. Didn't know it was a hybrid. Didn't know from anything. Really liked the wine though. Interesting to come back all these years while hybrids are sort of having this renaissance, and come to learn that that's not just an inexpensive wine, that wine actually does incredibly well all over Toronto.
Yeah.
And they even make some reserve versions of it. But anyway, arrived in New York City, and I knew more about Canadian wines than New York wines, but the Canadians told me to go after Finger Lake stuff. So I was looking immediately. And there was, I think that the Wine Marketing Association of Ontario made a similar push in New York City, around that time that you started going over there. Maybe not to as much success, which is maybe why they haven't continued it like they have in London. But there was one place that you could reliably find Ontario wines, and it was owned by a Canadian, which is Paul Greco at Terroir. And very recently he was listing the Cave Spring CSV, current vintage Riesling by the glass. And other than Terroir, that was really there was one guy, an importer, who was bringing in about 4 or 5 different producers. Rob Mackin from Artisan Imports. He had Tawes, Flat Rock, Norman Hardy, and Hidden Bench, and I might be forgetting one. All solid producers, right?
They're all benchmarks. Yeah, they're all benchmarks. Yeah, and going back to the Henry of Pelham, this is really interesting because I think that we could bring the Finger Lakes in here as well, because what we've seen in Niagara, I mean, if you look at the geography, you've got Lake Ontario, you've got the western end of Lake Ontario, you've got Toronto there, drive around past Hamilton, then you've got Niagara on the Lake, which is the US border, and you've got the Niagara River, and that's where the vineyards are, and the Niagara Peninsula. But then if you cross over into the USA and drive only a short distance, you get to Rochester, and then down from Rochester, you've got the Finger Lakes. But so we're talking lake effects are super important for both regions, Finger Lakes and Niagara. But what Niagara has that the Finger Lakes doesn't have is that Lake Ontario is very deep, and basically the whole of that Niagara wine region is suitable for vinifera. So basically, when people switch to vinifera, everyone switched. So the Baca Noir from Henry of Pelham is one of the few hybrid grapes that survive. The other is Vidal for ice wines, whereas pretty much everything else switched to vinifera. Whereas when you go to the Finger Lakes, what's really interesting is that you've got these lakes which may be deep, but they're not huge, and so there are areas where you can grow vinifera, but then there are areas where you simply can't. We'll still keep the hybrids. So what you've got in Finger Lakes is a lot more hybrids than you have in Niagara. You haven't had this whole-scale transition. And I think that's really interesting because I think the wine world now is beginning to wake up to hybrids.
You're right. And it was sort of wild to later discover that Henry of Pelham, not only was that wine popular in Toronto, but that they had reserve bottlings of it, and that they're using like some of their expensive oak for.
Yeah.
And that wine is in demand in a place like Toronto. And those other guys, you could get their wines in New York, the ones that we were talking about. And for a quick minute, Malivar was in New York too because of the Gamay
Malibor is
soon.
fantastic. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
They've been a massive champions of Gamay. Yeah.
But see, I don't even know right now if most of those producers are still available in New York right now, because it just never took off. And I always was really angry. It irritated me because you'll have a restaurant that could be influential and have a nice wine list, but maybe the wine list, the focus is like all domestic. Well, that's great, but then you remove your chance of exploring some really, really serious wines from the same continent,
Mm.
even much closer to you than the West Coast, or even Virginia. And no one could seem to figure out how to get them plugged in to a restaurant list well, which you kind of need to do to break. It really helps to break a new region.
I mean, I personally, I've really enjoyed going to the Finger Lakes a couple of times, um, and I just would love to see a little bit more sort of cross-border cooperation between these two very close wine regions, because I think there could be really fun things you could do, bringing together. And I know Thomas Batchelder's talked to this about me, about bringing together, this region where the lakes have got a massive effect on both regions, and just I think that there's, climatically and the wines have similar sorts of styles. I think it could be really interesting.
Well, I think that last year, that FL Excursion Conference was a nice start, and that wasn't the beginning. I mean, the regions, there's a small clique of Riesling diehards in particular from Ontario and New York and Michigan and Australia and Germany. I mean, these guys, how it is. They all know each other, and there's a big Riesling conference in Northern Michigan, City of Riesling, and then of course the one that was in Seattle, Riesling Rendezvous.
Mm.
And I think it was good to bring everybody together in the Finger Lakes kind of for the
Yeah,
first
yeah,
time that last summer. And you had Gabe from Cape Spring on your panel, right?
yeah, yeah. The Coast Spring
Uh,
making some cracking wines. I mean, look, there's so many people making great wines in Niagara and Finger Lakes. It's very exciting. It was a very exciting experience. The whole thing is really cool. And I just wish it could be just beyond Riesling. I think it was nice that I think we had one seminar that was kind of looking beyond Riesling to other varieties, which was kind of cool.
let's get back to Riesling because I think you and I have both have strong opinions on Riesling. Uh,
You
let me
didn't tell
show
me
you.
what your wine
Let me
was.
show
You
you
didn't
this
tell me
wine.
your
Yeah,
wine? Is this a secret?
you've had this wine, so I went sparkling.
Yeah, Glenora. Yeah, yeah.
Yep, 2013 Brut. It's you reviewed it. I remember the first summer you came.
Really nice
Uh,
wine, yeah?
yeah, traditional method, winemaker Steve DiFrancesco. I can't spend enough time with Steve. I met him, in fact, back in 2013.
Yeah.
This is a blend of about 75% Pinot and the rest Chardonnay, combination of both Cayuga and Seneca Lakes.
Well,
Um,
sparkling's been interesting in Niagara as well. But I think the other thing that's interesting about sparkling is I think sparkling could be a really good bridgehead to get people to take hybrids more seriously. And certainly the next generation, sort of third and fourth generation hybrids, I think that's pretty cool.
well, so Niagara, or the Canadian side of Niagara at least, with the history of sparkling wines in the Finger Lakes sort of being a big part of it, it doesn't seem like they quite share that same history in terms of sparkling wine, or at least any sort of dedication to it. And you would think, because of the amount of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay that they have over there, that they would
Yeah.
sort of be more into that in the mainstream.
Because Finger Lakes history, it's a lot of sparkling in the history of the Finger Lakes, in the Great Western, all that stuff.
Yeah,
It's fascinating history where this was people don't realize this, that the Finger Lakes, it was kind of the powerhouse of wine in the United States for a long time, yeah?
yeah. So Steve is got to be on the shortest list of people that really know the history of the Finger Lakes, and he it's partly studied and partly because he worked with those early Champagne guys that came over, Charles Fournier, and
Mm-hmm.
then his protege who came after him from Champagne, Guy DeVaux. Steve was working at Gold Seal when Charles Fournier was still involved. This would be in the 70s as a partner, but Guy DeVaux was the plant manager.
Mm.
And so Steve learned so much of just kind of orally, just passed down. He also worked at Bully Hill when Herman Weimer was there. He's just amassed this incredible sort of oral history of the region, and it's fantastic to talk to him about it. And not to mention the technical specs that he took away from Guy DeVoe. I mean, that's basically what this is.
Yeah.
His method for sparkling wine is almost to the spec Guy DeVoe from Champagne.
Just looking at some of the nice comments, guys, really appreciate all the comments and the hellos and all the people who've joined. It's really fantastic. I really like, so to all of you who've said hello back. And if you've got questions or you want to just heckle us, that's fine. That's good as well. We can cope with that.
Yes, I'm getting the heckles on a few different ways that they're coming in.
Yeah.
So sparkling wine in the Finger Lakes, I think it's really starting to be understood in the industry that this is a great direction for this region to go in, and that you can do so many useful things with all the grapes that we have in terms of sparkling wine.
Someone has asked, Len Thompson's asked if you're planning to plant any grapes at your lake house.
You never know.
And somebody with a very long handle, the Yeshef Weinberg Barastoria, is crushing some Osmote at the moment. Osmote, very exciting producer.
That's Philip,
the
buyer at Yes Chef Wine Bar in Queens, which has a lot of New York wines.
Yeah. In fact, the last week before the lockdown, I had a really nice evening with Kelby and Jenny from Weimar.
Oh yeah, they were. This is right at the moment.
That was like the Wednesday before I got sick on the Friday, and we smashed some really good wine at 10 cases with a nice group of people, and really just it was after a trade event, and it was just a lovely evening. And we started off Noble Rot, and we did some Aigle Laurier, the three of us, which was quite fun, and then went to dinner. But then I think the week before, Nathan Kendall was in town, and there was some Finger Lakes trade event stuff. And I think Nathan's been really interesting, both with his own label, but also with the collaboration with Pascaline Lepelletier, the famous New York sommelier. And the thing that I think is really interesting is their Chepica Pet Nat is made with the very oldest. They're not even very refined sort of hybrids. These are two sort of native varieties, Delaware and Catawba, which are kind of roundly despised. But they've made a really interesting pair of Pet Nats that have had quite an impact on the market. I think they're well made and they're interesting. They're naturally made. And this sort of stuff I think is really exciting because I think it brings every element of the Finger Lakes into play. Because previously a lot of the hybrids were reserved for these disgusting, $14, 80 grams a litre, red wines, sweet red wines, and aiming at the sort of like the lowest common denominator customer, which is perfectly legitimate if that's what people want. It's perfectly fine to go and buy them, but it's not necessarily showing off the Finger Lakes in the right light.
Do you think that there could be too much sparkling wine made from these hybrid grapes? I mean, right now, sparkling wine, especially in New York City, and it's happening in other parts of the country too. But I mean, the kind of New York City stereotypical sommelier scene is the obsession with bubbles. Do you think that there could come a time when maybe we make too much sparkling wine out of our grapes here and it busts, or can we not make enough? Right now, it feels like we can't make enough.
I think it's an interesting question. Right now, if the market still seems to be interested and looking for more, which is good. So then in that case, feed the market. Pet nat's a funny category. It's like I struggle a little bit with pet nat sometimes because it seems like it's amateur hour. You know, it's like people just bottle their still fermenting wine with 20 grams of sugar and hope for the best. But if it's done well, I think it's a really legitimate style, and I think it's the market seems to be receptive to it, and it's kind of cool.
Yeah, I had one recently of a grape called Melody
Yeah.
from a winery on Cayuga Lake. It's the one and only time I've ever tasted that particular grape that I can remember. But Dave Pittard at Buttonwood Grove, when he bought the winery, there's like, I don't know, 2 rows or something, or some small block of it. And I think it might have been the only hybrid that they kept around. Um, and made some really great pen nat from it this year. It was a big hit at an industry dinner that I was on in very, very early March down in the city. So it's the other good thing about it is we can keep doing it. We don't necessarily have to plant more to
No,
make these wines.
no, I
So
agree, but I
you
think
don't have to make a bet on planting more.
yeah, somebody's just shitty wine memes has said that usually pet nat, or I think it was, explodes every time I open it. Well, this is the thing. The problem with pet nat is often when you make a wine in this style, you have lots of nucleation sites in the bottle. So when you open it, you can get this gushing, and sometimes you can lose a third of a bottle just from the gushing. So a really skilled pet nat making, I think, has to work around ways of being able to open the bottle where there's no gushing. That's a fundamental, but it's very hard to predict. But I think that also what we're seeing in Europe now is this move towards third or fourth generation hybrids, where they've been breeding and breeding and breeding to try and get rid of some of the more esoteric native grape variety characteristics to produce disease-resistant varieties that have flavors that are more in line with what we expect from wine grapes. And that would be exciting to see some more of that in the areas where, because obviously these varieties will probably be cold tolerant as well. So replacing some of the more, I don't want to use the word primitive, but less sophisticated sort of natives and hybrids with more sophisticated ones would be quite interesting, I think, because there's some places you can't grow vinifera in the Finger Lakes where you could potentially grow sort of these next generation hybrids. And I think that you look in Vermont, you see the success that La Garagistas had. Those wines are expensive,
Yeah.
and they're kind of cool. They're sold through the Natural Wine Channel, but those are all hybrids. They're just next generation hybrids. It's kind of cool,
And so you've spent a good amount of time in Quebec and Nova Scotia,
Yeah.
or some
Yeah,
time at least.
yeah.
I don't know if anybody who doesn't live there has spent a good amount of time there, but you've spent some time there. Tell me about that, because I know that there is vinifera going on as well.
So Quebec, the revolution in Quebec has been with the geotextiles.
Oh, that's
which means
in the winter.
that you can grow vinifera in Quebec, which gets brutally cold in the winter, enough to kill vinifera without hilling over, because hilling over is the only option. The problem with hilling over is when you unearth in April or whenever you tend to lose some primary buds. But with geotextiles, they're not losing primary buds, and suddenly, the summers there are quite warm. They're finding they can ripen things they never could before. So that's kind of interesting. So Quebec, I think, has got a nice mix of vinifera and hybrid. And now with the geotextiles, they're motoring ahead with the vinifera. But some of the hybrid stuff there is really cool. Nova Scotia is interesting because Nova Scotia has got a really nice mix of hybrids and vinifera. And you look at a winery like Benjamin Bridge, which is hugely successful with its sparkling wines. The regular Benjamin Bridge non-vintage is a blend of vinifera with hybrids, and it's a pretty cool wine. And then what they've got there is
farming biodynamically.
They've also got this brand called Tidal Bay. So Tidal Bay is sort of an appellation in Nova Scotia, which is pretty much all hybrid, and it's made with a little bit of residual sugar, maybe 10 to 20 grams, but very fresh, high acidity, bright, fruity wines that are inexpensive. And I think there are around 18 to 20 of these Tidal Bays made every year by different producers. And I think it's a really good, clear communication to consumers that this is this sort of style of wine. This is what you're going to get. And they're all pretty consistent. They're lovely wines. They're not serious wines, but it's a clever use of hybrids. And they've got one of their interesting hybrids there is Lacadie Blanc,
Yeah.
which is a really nice variety. It has these it looks bizarre. It's a white grape variety with red stems. It's kind of weird. But it
So I
makes nice wines.
remember last year at the Canadian tasting at the Embassy in London, um, there were a few producers from Nova Scotia there, and at least two, if not all three of them, were farming biodynamically.
Mm.
Now, is that now? I imagine it's maybe a little less brutal there than in Quebec in terms of the
Oh,
winter
it's
because it's
less
closer
brutal.
to the
It's much
ocean.
cooler. It's maritime. It's a maritime climate, so it's much. You can probably farm biodynamically there quite easily.
Is
Not
any
easily, no. It can be quite damp. We've got some questions, very interesting questions. How much Marquette or La Crescent have you had? And my answer is just from La Garagista. Someone else says the Marquettes from Vermont are fantastic and from northern New York. Yeah, Marquette's pretty smart. So what are the next generation hybrids that you mentioned, Jenny? So it's like in Europe, we've got these things called peewees.
Yeah.
It's so they're basically looking to get disease resistance. That's the main thing. So with the disease resistance, what happens is they'll find the disease resistance characteristics, and then they'll backcross with vinifera's and look to keep the disease resistance, but look to diminish the flavor impact of the hybrid that had the disease resistance in the first place.
And
And
this
now
is
with
going
things like
on.
marker-assisted selection, you can do this in a more targeted way. And so there's a whole bunch of people in Europe who've been looking to develop these new. They don't like you to call them hybrids, but they've got some hybrid in them, which is where they get the resistance from.
And this is going on at like the universities all over, right? Germany,
Yeah,
Switzerland, Italy.
and in the US, I think there's at least two research institutes that are looking just to develop these new hybrids.
Yeah. So when you get to Quebec, are
Mm.
they able to farm organically or biodynamically over there?
Yes, you can. I mean, the challenge is it's kind of warm and slightly humid in the summer, but it's that a lot of regions are like that, and certainly Niagara. Well, someone said about Minnesota and Cornell. Minnesota and Cornell are the two main. So I think with Minnesota and Cornell and the people doing peewees in Europe, then I think they're all doing good work, and I'm really interested in this. I'd love to see more people working with these varieties, and I know one producer in Germany, the Stedtlerhof, where that he's got 2 hectares of a prime site in the Moselle in Crove, and he's going to be planting peewees there, so hybrids.
Well, I would. It's you know how it is in New York. We've talked about this a little bit. I mean, there is a divide. There are some people who are vocally opposed to this resurgence that hybrids are having right now because of all the work that's been done on vinifera, and I get it. You know, people have worked hard on the vinifera farming here for a while, and once you get some momentum, and then this hybrid movement, kind of
Well,
starts to
you
catch
did have a
up.
very influential winemaker who was telling people that actually hybrids cause cancer at one stage. So
It's true.
yeah. So that's like it's quite there's a little bit of history there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. At least we have some precedent for this. But in terms of shifting from hybrid to vinifera for a second, because Riesling, we've both said things about Riesling that we probably shouldn't have. What do the Canadians in Ontario feel in terms of their Riesling identity? Because in the Finger Lakes, by and large, it's Team Riesling there.
Yeah. Well, in Niagara, the Rieslings do really well. I mean, they're really good wines, but there's a price ceiling. People don't pay much money for them. You can pick up a top quality Riesling for $20, Canadian, which is not a lot of money. So people like Cave Springs making cracking wines, and they're like not that expensive. Whereas Pinot Noir, it's like double that. There seems to be a different. So Rieslings could be world class, and and they just still don't. There seems to be a price ceiling for Riesling. And someone's asked a question about what about Blaufränkisch in the New World? Well, obviously in the Finger Lakes, this is very interesting because Lemberger or Blaufränkisch has become quite important in the Finger Lakes, whereas that's never been planted in most New World wine regions.
I don't think I've ever seen one from Canada, from Ontario.
No, I haven't. No.
Mm-hmm. But it is coming up. There's some people who will tell you who work with all the the major red grapes in the Finger Lakes, Pinot Noir, Cab Franc, Blaufränkisch. They'll say Blaufränkisch is their favorite to work with, or it's the best. It makes the most sense for whatever reason.
So someone says that, well, Len says that Finger Lakes Riesling price is definitely on the rise, in some places insanely so.
So let's
Somebody else
talk
says,
about
I
that.
love Niagara Rieslings. Well, look, I love Niagara Rieslings as well. I mean, look at Charles Baker, makes some fantastic ones, and Cave Springs, and pretty much everyone who's focused on Riesling does good work with it.
Yep. So you were talking the other day. You were bantering with someone about mechanical farming, organic farming, mechanical harvesting, essentially. And is that, I don't remember if it was, can it still be natural wine or something like that if it's been organically
the context
farmed?
was that there were some natural wine rules that were published in France.
Yeah.
And
that's what it was. Yeah, you're right.
And they said no mechanical harvesting. And I thought, well, why does machine harvesting rule a wine out from being natural wine? I think that's kind of look, I love natural wine and I think it's great, but it's like, I've spent lots of time in regions where pretty much all the grapes are harvested by machine.
Yeah.
Even from organic vineyards like Marlborough.
So this ties into one of the questions about that comments Len was making there about Riesling prices going up in the Finger Lakes. So there's a winery, you might have tasted some of their wines maybe last year, Wagner Vineyards in the Finger Lakes on the east side of Seneca Lake. This is a legacy family. They've been farming there for 4 generations or something like that. John Wagner, the grower. This is maybe the most interesting grower to hear from in the Finger Lakes, or maybe even in the entire state. Wagner, I believe, owns the largest vinifera acreage in the Finger Lakes. So they make about 30,000 cases, something like that. Their Rieslings every year are top Rieslings, and the prices do not seem to go up. The quality continues to go up, but the prices remain the same. And it's a big operation, so they've owned the land for a long time, so they can kind of control that a little bit more. But one of the things that I like about going there and tasting there is hearing from the grower, who's the owner, John Wagner. And he always says, he's like, if you've done the handwork early in the vineyard, then mechanical harvesting is the way to go. But it takes a lot of good handwork, and he's meticulous. He has a mechanical engineering background, so he designed his tractor. It's incredible. I think it de-stems and sorts and does all this incredible stuff. But basically the idea was as much handwork as you can and need, and then you can finish, with a machine harvest.
I think I would personally, if I was making wine, I would like to hand harvest and have everything come in small crates, not macro bins, with half a ton in, just the small 18, 20 kilogram crates. Then you can pop them in a refrigerated container, and the process the next day at low temperature, hand sort them. That's perfect, yeah. But also I understand that in some circumstances, the best option in terms of quality might be to run through, as you say, a vineyard that's, where there's homogeneous quality, where anything bad has been dropped with a machine harvester. So you're picking at the optimum moment, get the grapes in. I mean, I've ridden a machine harvester before, and then seen the grapes on a sorting table afterwards, so this is not a mushy fruit. This is berries, that can then be sorted. And in some circumstances, I think that could be the better quality option. You have to be open-minded and you have to be smart and be able to look at the different compromises you make, because every choice you make has a compromise attached with it. So it's about making the right sort of compromises. And I just couldn't see in that discussion on Twitter why you couldn't make wine naturally with a machine harvester. Why it would definitely exclude it from being natural.
Yeah, I mean, it also, I mean, if you, it I don't know, on the one hand, it could be good. This is encouraging smaller producers to only be able to
Yeah,
have that title,
yeah,
essentially, um, just to try to find a silver lining. But no, I agree with you 100%. And those Wagner Rieslings, just when in talking about cost, I mean, these are, you're not, they're a single vineyard, which is
yeah.
called Kaywood East, single block. I mean, it's like an $18 wine on the shelf or something like that. It's ridiculous, and it's amazing.
So now I think if you like Riesling, generally speaking, you're like the luckiest wine lover in the planet, because
Right.
you go to the Moselle. You've seen the vineyards in the Moselle. It's like insane. It's
I've
like
never been to the Mosel. I've seen photos. I have been to the
yeah,
Rheingau.
yeah. I've been there in December and January and a few times before that, and it just blows my brains because in terms of working the vines, I'm not sure I could work those vines because I don't like heights and they're so steep. You're looking down those slopes. It's like, for me, it's like
Yeah,
terrifying.
it's a double black diamond ski hill.
Yet, like you can buy a really good Moselle Cabernet Riesling from a good producer in the Moselle for, I don't know, 10 to 15 bucks. It's insanely affordable.
Have
And
you?
that kind of ruins it for the rest of the Riesling world. It's like because this is like your benchmark region for the grape variety, and the wines aren't expensive. Yeah, you can spend a crazy amount on a gold capsule TBA, but it's like that's not the exciting end of Riesling for me is the focused dry end of Riesling. You know, so I think it kind of like when we did the Riesling Rendezvous a few years ago, we were tasting some incredible wines. Actually, interestingly, quite a few of them from Canada and New York State, which I think and obviously Seattle and well, not Seattle, from Columbia Valley, and they're super affordable.
Well, I mean that it's funny. Yeah, of course. Even the benchmark can't charge, you know, anywhere near Burgundy prices, but that's because of the consumer in the end won't pay for it and doesn't want it. And that's the biggest struggle with Riesling is that, I've spent a lot of time as a sommelier selling Riesling or trying to sell Riesling. And you, even talking to Pascaline about this was kind of funny. I mean, she was kind of making a joke, but I'm like, you can sell anything. People
So you
come to
work with
your,
Pascaline, yeah? Yeah.
I did, yeah, at Rouge for a year.
Did you ever sell the last bottle?
Oh my God, you don't want to do that.
Anyway, so going back to Riesling.
So she, I was like, you could sell it. People come to your restaurant to have you just sell them whatever it is that you want to sell them. She's like, yeah, it takes me about maybe a minute longer to sell Riesling.
But I think look, one of the things that's changing things in Riesling, I think, has been within Germany and Austria is introducing these new classifications. Look, I know classifications are bullshit and stuff, but the Grossgewachs, and someone has talked about Grossgewachs on the feed there.
Mm-hmm.
The Grossgewachs, and in Austria, they've a really thoughtful implementation of the same sort of thing, where they haven't quite got the Grossgewachs thing, but they're progressing towards that. And I think that sort of thing in Germany with the VDP, the Grossgewachs, that's I think that the criterion there is a dry Riesling with from a top site. I think that 9 grams a litre of residual sugar is the maximum. But some of these wines, I've been to tastings of the Grossgewachs, and it's like just like astonishing, mind-blowing wines. And those are selling for a lot more money. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's kind of clever because it's
Yeah,
like the
they're
GAG has
selling.
become a trusted brand.
They're selling, you're right, for more money, but I ask myself in the sommelier community, have you ever sold a bottle of wine at a restaurant of like Keller or um I don't know. I'm just trying to think of stuff that's really hard to get. Um like Keller or
Egon Muller.
Egon Mueller, sure. Have you ever sold one of those bottles to someone who was not in the industry?
Yeah.
It's just other sommeliers who come in and order those.
Right. So that's the situation. Yeah.
I mean,
It's a
it's a
wine trade
hard
thing.
sell.
Yeah.
It's a hard sell, and it's a highly sensitive topic, and it's there's a lot of that's one of the best things about New York State is that there's such a diversity of grapes here, and you can really
Yeah,
do
but
so
what's
much with
interesting
it.
is the success that Washington State's had with Riesling, because I think what they've managed to do so well is you've got this Chateau Saint Michel stuff
Right,
that's really affordable and delicious, progressing through to then you've got the Ernie Lowson collaboration, the Eroica.
right.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's
And
like a
then you've got
$20 bottle of wine.
yeah, which is cool. And then you've got stuff beyond that as well. Not a lot beyond that, but it's like I think that the volumes of Riesling that are coming out of Washington State, it's been really interesting. That's
I mean,
that's cool.
it's they make more Riesling at Chateau Saint Michel than the whole of New York State,
Yeah, yeah,
and it is. You're right. It's pretty good.
yeah. When we tested it blind at the Riesling Rendezvous, and it's like, yeah, okay. It's like, yeah, we just gave a really good rating to a 12 buck bottle of wine. It's like,
Yeah, and then like Egon Mueller was in the tasting too.
yeah, yeah,
That also is hard. It makes it challenging for
yeah.
for the poor Riesling and the poor sommelier who has to sell Riesling.
So do you
Another,
think do you think Finger Lakes should develop its reputation beyond Riesling?
well, it's they no one wants to hear this, but it might happen whether they like it or not, because I've done nothing but show trade around the Finger Lakes for the last 2 years, and they get so excited. The trade, when they latch on to things that they're excited about, like for example in the Finger Lakes, sparkling wine.
Yeah.
The trade comes up there and they walk away blown away by the sparkling wines.
What about Cabernet Franc? Any
Cabernet Franc,
excitement?
Cabernet Franc.
La Frankish or Lemberger?
Yes, but not in the same way as Cabernet Franc, because Cabernet Franc is certainly big in sommelier circles from the Loire right now. So it's something that you can easily identify a benchmark if you're
Yeah.
someone who tastes a lot, right?
Mhm.
And so what they're tasting up in the Finger Lakes nowadays are these incredible, high acid, snappy, crunchy, some people playing around with the whole cluster and carbonic,
Mm.
others going for a more full-bodied,
Yeah.
almost ripe Bordeaux style, and you can do it all there. So I think it may just happen on its own. But the question is, there's a lot of Riesling right now.
Yeah.
There's people that end up with Riesling hanging on their vines at the end of the year in certain vintages, not in the best vintages, but
So the Cabernet Franc could be really cool because that's something that the Niagara wine region's really done amazingly well with. It's almost like I think Cabernet Franc suffers a little because it's seen in Bordeaux as a blending variety. And I think that actually Cabernet Franc is probably a more complete variety than Cabernet Sauvignon.
yeah,
And we just need people to wake up to the fact that this is, and also I guess the other place where Cabernet Franc is grown widely is the Loire, which maybe makes very hard to appreciate versions of Cabernet Franc. I like it a lot, but it's kind of extreme from the Loire.
it is, but the ubiquity with which that has taken off in the sommelier community in the U.S. Is certainly has been great for New York Cabernet Franc.
Good. That's good to hear. I think
Yeah,
it's great. What about Gamay? Is any Gamay in Finger Lakes? Because it's going
very
full
little.
guns in Niagara.
Yeah, and you know what? That was one of the first things that when I got here, first time I went to the Finger Lakes, I only visited a few wineries. This is back around 2012, and I went to Fox Run, and
Hmm?
I'm tasting with Peter Bell, the winemaker, and I
Yeah.
specifically went there for a reason. I was like, okay, this winery has a good reputation. He has sort of a science academic kind of background, and he's Canadian. So I want to taste his wines, but I also want to ask, where's the Gamay? Because he would know. And his answer, he was just like, there's no good answer for that.
Just hasn't
And
been tried. Yeah.
It just
Oh,
hasn't been
so
done right
shout
yet.
out to Karen Jenkins, who says that the Cabernet Franc is now riper from the Royal. I'd agree with that. It's riper now. Yeah, good call.
Probably. Len's talking about Gewürztraminer too. That's another great one.
Oh, there's some cracking ones. I had one very recently from Finger Lakes that was like straight,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah. I mean, tough. Winters are tough on the Gewürz. But back to the Gamay. There's a couple plantings. Sheldrake Point on Cayuga Lake has a decent planting of Gamay, and it's certainly one of their more popular wines down in New York City, and it's good. There's splashes here and there throughout the rest of the Finger Lakes. Everybody would be planting it if they could get their hands on the plant material.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's hard right now. Down here in the Hudson Valley, there's one sizable planting of it from I have their Cabernet Franc right in front of me, winery called White Cliff. They have two
Someone just
different.
mentioned Whitecliff on Len's mentioned Whitecliff. Yeah.
Yeah, and the Gamma is great, and they have two different sites for it now. One which is right on the river, and the other one which is a little bit farther inland on their home estate farm. So it will happen. It's just like it's amazing that it's taken this long, considering those Canadian Gammas. Oh no, I
So
lost you.
so
Are we back?
the last Finger Lakes wine I tried was like at the weekend. I had a what was it? Standing Stone Saperavi.
Yeah,
Pretty cool wine.
yeah.
Really
Uh,
good. Yeah.
Largest planting of Saperavi outside of the Republic of Georgia.
6 acres. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure Russia's got some planted there as well.
Uh, yeah, I mean, this is what they tell you when you go to Standing Stone.
Yeah, I know, but I think that I've been to the Krasnodar region in Russia, and I think there's quite a lot of Saperavi there, but I haven't checked. But anyway,
This is
we're cool.
incredible. This is
Until
incredible
we're
Finger Lakes lore, though.
Yeah, I know. There's 6 acres. Yeah, but really cool wine.
Yeah,
Very
no,
non-Saperavi, but super
Saperavi's
delicious. Yeah,
got a future. Yeah, there's even been some new plantings. Dr. Frank does well with the Saperavi. McGregor Vineyards does well, but I feel like Gamay is going to come in
yeah,
numbers. It's just going to take a minute.
yeah,
Pinot Noir will stick around for those who like it, and I think that you're just going to start seeing more and more sparkling wine, like
yeah.
even more sparkling Riesling.
Also, someone's just asked about Finger Lakes Rosé. Do you have any that you like?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much all of them. Like anybody who makes a wine that you like probably makes a good rosé. There, when rosé really took off in New York City, dry rosé, um, Finger Lakes, they got in early for that, which was really great, and the community really likes the dry rosés down in the city from the Finger Lakes. Is that a big deal in London?
What rosé?
Dry rosé?
Yeah, massive. Yeah, huge.
Okay.
It's been growing for years and years now. I think. Look, in France, it's a huge deal. In France, it's like a third of. Is it a third? I think it's a third of all wines are rosé. Rosé is like a huge deal there. It's like even muscly 6'2" rugby players drink rosé in France. In the UK, I guess it's still kind of seasonal, but it's it does really well. And I think the rules are different from rosé. You can bottle in Magnum. You can bottle in alternative bottle shapes, and people
Yeah.
go for it massively.
Cans, boxes, kegs.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, we're coming up on an hour, but before
yeah.
you go, I want to ask you about couple of the not so new but new-ish producers in Niagara. Um, have you had the wines from Big Head?
Big Head, yeah, fantastic wines. Really, they push the boat out a little bit. They do like a Passamento stuff, and the dad and the son, they're super cool guys. The Big Head name comes from the fact that Polish people have big heads. So I think and when you meet these guys, it's like, yeah, your heads are kind of big. But those wines, I think, are very, very cool wines. I've really enjoyed them. And they're using a lot of concrete eggs and different size fermenters, experimenting a bit. And some of the wines are quite rich and big. some of the Passamento style reds. But when I visited them and tasted their wines, I came away thinking, yeah, you guys are really making fantastic wines.
Yeah, the Chenin Blanc and the Gamay is what I had from my friend Bob Medill, who's another Canadian who works in the wine industry in the Finger Lakes and goes to Niagara often, brought back Gamay and Chenin. I mean, tasting those, it's like, this is catnip for sommeliers in New York City.
Yeah.
What about, so the thing that kind of annoyed me for a while, and I like these wines, which is why I hate to say it annoyed me, but I think you'll understand, is, I don't know, in the last 5 years or so, you ask a sommelier or a buyer or whatever in New York, oh, do you have any Canadian wines, or have you had any? Do you like them? The one that always comes up is like, oh yeah, the only one that I know or like is Pearl Morissette. And I like these wines, but it took the natural wine movement to sort of really, really rise to where it is today, to break that brand when you and I know that all these good brands were already there.
The Pearl Morissette, they're really cracking wines. I mean, Francois and Svetlana are great people, and they're making really good wines. Someone else has said Leaning Post Leaning Post,
Oh, yeah.
Fantastic wines as well. And Rosewood, the ex-assistant winemaker from Pearl Morissette's gone there, and suddenly the wines are like in a more natural direction and super cool wines. There's some of the good names in and Hidden Bench. Yeah, someone's mentioned that Hidden Bench. Harold is making very precise, well-made wines from organically grown grapes. Really cool. Yeah.
All right, let's talk about some music before we go.
Music,
so
yeah.
I see your you're enjoying your quarantine. New guitar and a new rack.
A new guitar. Well, I always had this old. In the past, I had this like an old, like Fender combo. And I used to run a multi-effects processor, Boss GX700, into the Fender combo. It's not ideal. So what I did is I've just got off eBay. I've got a Marshall valve state, power amplifier. And I'm going to run it out of the Boss GX700 into a Marshall cab. And I've got a new guitar. I also picked up a classical guitar, a Yamaha Cedar Solid Top 1 off eBay as well.
You growing the nails? Growing the nails out?
Well, no, my nails are quite good actually. My fingers are quite sort of, they're good guitaring fingers, and I've got reasonable nails. But classical's different. Nylon string is a very different thing. So I'm getting used to it. I think it's a nice sound. So I'm really avoiding the tendency to use a plectrum with nylon string, which a lot of acoustic and electric guitarists do. You shouldn't do it.
When I was in school, there was no YouTube or anything, obviously. So there was one DVD of Julian Bream concerts, and now all that stuff is on YouTube. There's so much good Julian Bream YouTube stuff.
YouTube's great. I mean, seriously, I'm gonna just start spending days just playing guitar and learning new stuff. But I've always been a sort of like somebody who likes to, rather than learn other people's stuff, I like to improvise and then write stuff down and play on GarageBand and record things and just to try and do something original. That's my favorite thing.
Well, I appreciate that. When I watched when you were advertising your new guitar, the first thing you played was what I think might be the greatest bit of rhythm guitar playing ever recorded in history, which is TNT.
Oh, right, a bit of, yes, Malcolm Young. Yeah. We're going to be cut off in about a minute, I think, so.
Oh, damn. All right, well, hey, I'm really glad you're feeling better.
Yeah.
And this was fun.
It's been lovely to connect like this. It's been a good conversation.
Yeah. Take good care, and we'll talk to you soon. We'll do it again.
Yeah, dude. Nice one.
Man.